Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all. I'm glad to see that despite SAIS being in the period of midterm exams, which is, of course, a very challenging period for students, there are people who have indeed wanted to avail themselves of the opportunity of meeting our distinguished host tonight. And I'm very pleased to have and honored to have the opportunity of welcoming special representative Luigi Di Maio to SAIS today. It's a pleasure in multiple respects. First, because as I told Mr. Di Maio, we view ourselves as a truly transatlantic institution and therefore with a strong European leg. At least that's the vision of the transatlantic partnership that I think we are here to promote. SAIS has been created almost 70 years ago with the ambition of fostering mutual knowledge between both sides of the Atlantic. But it has increasingly become clear that if we want to do that properly, we have to open up to other parts of the world. It's very important to understand that there are things happening on the global stage where we need to make the most of the views that are defended by other people in other regions of the world. And for this, we have a role to play as an institution that encourages dialogue between all those regions. That's what we are trying to do in multiple directions. One of these directions is, of course, the Middle East and North Africa, and therefore it is very important for us to avail ourselves of the possibility of making sense of what the stakes are in those regions and what action European institutions have undertaken in relation to that region. And I think that there is no one better placed than Special Representative Di Maio to illustrate this because of, not only because of the position he occupies, but also because of his background. I mean, and talking about his background, I'm sure you have had a look at the little resume that appears in the leaflets we have circulated, and you have seen that he has behind him a very rich career. First as a member of parliament in Italy, then as a party leader, as a member of a number of cabinets in very prominent positions, culminating with his stint as foreign minister from when was that? 2018, if I remember well, 19, yes, to 22. So quite a long career behind him. Normally, when you see that kind of resume, you expect to see then an elderly person with the gray hair. But as you can see, it's not his case yet. And that's, again, a good illustration of the rapid pace at which this career has been conducted. He now has been appointed by the EU to be its special envoy in a region which is of great strategic importance for Europe. It's a great opportunity, of course, for the EU to avail itself of the experience he's gained on the international stage. And it's therefore a great opportunity for us to have him with us tonight. As you know, the rules of the game are very simple. I will now give him the floor for his introductory remarks, but we very much hope that this will be followed by an intense discussions, because there is no shortage of important and difficult issues to address. So I want to conclude this brief introduction by expressing once again my gratitude to him for joining us tonight and to say that I very much look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, dear Rector, Professor, and thank you, professors, thank you, students, for being here. Good luck for your mid-exam session, and thank you, and thank you very much even to our online audience. I prepared this speech. I will read it, but then whenever you want afterwards, I'm at your disposal for a more informal and conducive Q&A. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for organizing this event. And it is a great pleasure for me to be here, intervening on the relationship between the European Union and the Gulf countries in the context of the changing dynamics in the global order. It is a fascinating but also a complex and challenging subject, and we have chosen a date that will not make my job easier, because on the eve of a crucial presidential election that can have different consequences depending on the results of what looks like a very close race. On the positive side, there is a lot we can tell that will remain valid regardless of the color of the next US administration. Many of the trends affecting the EU and the Gulf region and their relationship are in fact of structural nature. Some of these fundamental elements were very recently acknowledged by the first ever EU-GCC summit, which took place in Brussels 2 weeks ago, and by the final joint statement of this summit. I will make 4 points in this speech. The first, I will start this presentation by briefly recalling why I am here. It all began with the new EU policy towards the Gulf in May 2022. With this document, the EU Commission and the High Representative for the EU Foreign Policy propose a wide and comprehensive array of actions to reinforce cooperation and move towards a true partnership with the Gulf. The appointment of a EU Special Representative for the Gulf region was one of these many suggestions. After the approval of the EU member states, the position was established, and I had the honor to be entrusted with the role by the Council of the European Union as of June 1st, 2023. Second, I will touch upon the EU-GCC summit and its outcomes as the most significant milestone so far after the launch of the EU strategy for the Gulf. The summit is a testimony of the increased value of this partnership for both sides, but also of the necessity to continue to work in order to consolidate it. Thirdly, I will address the strategic posture and political choices and preferences of the Gulf countries in the current global and regional security environment, and in which way they can affect and are affected by European choices and preferences. And my fourth and last point, I swear, will be on how the relationship between the EU and the GCC can effectively contribute to a new cooperative world order, even in these times of intense strategic rivalry among global and regional actors. First, as I mentioned, in May 2022, the European Union launched a new policy document aimed to establish the conditions for a strategic partnership with the Gulf countries. This new strategy identifies a few sectoral areas for cooperation, from trade to energy, from regional security to people contacts. It also called for a stronger and more intense institutional relationship between the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council, thus recognizing that we have a stake also in promoting the consolidation of the unity of this bloc as an important factor for the stability and the prosperity of the region. When discussions were initiated on this new EU policy for the Gulf, the premises for this new cooperation were both of geopolitical and geoeconomic nature. The economic rationale for the developing a more structured and solid relationship with the Gulf was and is compelling from the European point of view. The GCC countries are very important economic actors, and many of them have embarked in ambitious transformation programs showing vision and courage. One main driver for these transformation efforts is the transitioning away from fossil fuels, which, as you know, the European Union is championing. It is interesting that the Gulf countries, while obviously retaining an important stake in the fossil fuels-based economy, are reflecting on the long-term consequences of the response to the climate change. This vision can be summed up in one single word: diversification. For Europe, not only it overlaps our fundamental political choices, it also reinforces mutual interest and the complementarities for our respective economic systems. The cooperation on energy is one of the pillars of the EU strategy for the Gulf and of my mandate. This implies also working together on connectivity as the Gulf becomes a leading actor of renewable energy, in particular hydrogen. We have to address, for instance, the problem of how to transport it, which means also cooperating on infrastructures such as energy grids, ports, and digital networks. A reinforced and resilient connectivity demands, among other things, that maritime security in the Red Sea is ensured, that shipping routes are kept free and open, and undersea cables are secure and well protected. It also requires a stable regional security environment. Unfortunately, this is not what we have now. I mentioned earlier also the geopolitical motivations for the EU to seek a strategic partnership with the Gulf. When it was launched, all the indicators in the region seemed to point in the right direction. In the pursuit of the objectives of the Abraham Accords, Israel and the Gulf countries were moving closer to each other. The intra-GCC rift had just been mended with the Alula agreements, and the rapprochement with Iran was also happening. It seemed that in this more favorable context, both cooperation on economy, including trade, and on regional political affairs could feed off each other quite nicely. The post-October 7 dynamics have affected all of this profoundly. The transformative projects of Gulf countries and the prospects of cooperation on connectivity and resilience of the supply chains have to be implemented in a far less favorable environment. The uncertainty it has cast on IMEC, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, and of course the disruption caused by Houthis attacks to the commercial traffic in the Red Sea are glaring examples of these new challenges. We need to work in a different context. The positive agenda of cooperation based on economic complementarities and converging visions must be accompanied by common diplomatic engagement for conflict management and de-escalation in the region, as well as by a reinforced security partnership. I will come back to some of these points when speaking about the results of the EU-GCC summit and the potential benefits of our cooperation with the Gulf countries. Reflecting this shared awareness of today's geopolitical context, the intensity of institutional exchanges at all levels between the EU and GCC have never been so strong. In addition to already existing formats of cooperation, a structured security dialogue on senior officials level has been launched this year and will be replicated in 2025. Furthermore, I've had the honor to be tasked by the High Representative Josep Borrell to co-organize, together with the GCC Qatari Presidency and the Secretary General of the GCC, the first high-level formal ministerial level last April in Luxembourg, EU-GCC, an informal and extremely productive gathering of EU and GCC member states to discuss regional issues and test convergences, which will have a second edition next year. In a similar setting, the EU organized a ministerial meeting on the eve of the EU-GCC summit, which was also an extremely useful occasion to compare notes and strengthen coordination on regional files. On May this year, we organized as EU and GCC the first ever Young Diplomats program for joint training and simulation of our young diplomats at the Bruges College in Bruges. Let me now focus on the significance and the outcomes of the recently held EU-GCC summit. It has been described as an historic milestone, a definition that is justified by the fact that it has taken place for the first time ever and in the difficult geopolitical context that we know very well. A context where no one would have been surprised had it been postponed, waiting for better times. On the contrary, not only it did happen, but also confirmed the mutual willingness and interest to elevate the relationship to the level of strategic partnership between EU and GCC. In fact, you can read in the final joint statements that it refers to this new era of cooperation between the GCC and the EU as a strategic partnership for peace and prosperity, thus highlighting the two fundamental pillars of our relationship, as well as their interconnection. Obviously, when 33 countries are sitting at the same table, it's not realistic to expect all of them to fully agree on everything. There are nuanced approaches to regional crisis among member states in both blocs and between the blocs. But the two regions have much in common. They both want a world stable and founded on peace and cooperation, rather than marked by competition and violence. They also share, unfortunately, the geographic proximity to areas ridden by extreme insecurity and conflict. The escalation in the Middle East and the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine are negatively affecting the global security environment, and our two regions are the most exposed to their shockwaves. Cooperating is therefore a geostrategic imperative, and whatever we will be able to do together will benefit not only us, but the entire international community. One of the most encouraging outcomes of the summit is that we were able to come together on the fundamental principles and goals. Respect for international law, including international humanitarian law, and strict adherence to the UN charters as regards principles. As for our shared key goals, the pursuit of the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine and the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine were clearly stated and unanimously reaffirmed in the final joint statement. We are united in calling for de-escalation in the dangerous situation in Lebanon and in recognizing the essential role played by the Lebanese armed force and by the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, as well as the need to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. We are also on the same page in calling on Iran to pursue regional de-escalation, while underlining the continuous need for diplomatic engagement with Iran to address, among other files, our shared concerns about the Iranian nuclear program. We share the same position on the need to preserve freedom of navigation in the Red Sea as basis of the global trade and free flow of goods. The European Union operation named Aspides pursues this very objective by protecting commercial ships from Houthi actions, which are also causing concerns for their potentially dangerous implications for the environment, as showed by the recent case of the attack against the Greek oil tanker Sounion. Maritime security is a priority area of EU-GCC security cooperation in the framework of the mentioned structured security dialogue at senior officials level, together with such other important sectors as counterterrorism, cybersecurity, non-proliferation, and response to natural disasters. Maritime security in the Red Sea is where the two fundamental agendas in the EU and GCC cooperation, namely the regional security and the preservation of connectivity, converge. This should encourage us to work towards the development of a broad range of solutions to jointly address this challenge in order to better defend the foundation of our prosperity. At the end of the day, what our societies want and need is the necessary stability and security to be able to grow in a sustainable way. For that to happen, a strong commitment to develop further our cooperation on trade and investment is key. Together, the European Union and the GCC represent 20% of the global economy and 70.5% of global trade. A stronger privileged trade and investment relationship between the EU and the GCC and its members is of mutual interest. There is no shortage of new areas where we can leverage our complementarities, multiply and diversify the economic relationship, and enhance economic integration. Green economy, including clean energy, and high-end technology, including artificial intelligence, are extremely promising sectors where to explore the potential of our cooperation and help our respective societies to better cope with the structural transformation we are going through. The strategic value of resilient supply chains and of a more circular and clean economy is at the foundation of our mutual interest to develop the cooperation. To fully tap into the opportunities that new technologies offer, we need each other more than ever. In a world of intensified strategic competition among several actors of global scale, acting individually cannot be enough. We must join forces and pull together our skills and resources. As the summit joint statement clearly acknowledges, this requires a renewed joint commitment to take forward work on trade with the final goal to reach a regional EU-GCC free trade agreement, but also to explore in complementarity specific agreements in the framework of cooperation arrangements signed between the EU and the GCC member states. The EU is also keen to advance work of strategic partnership agreements with individual GCC countries. Tailor-made cooperation across different sectors and policy areas, from security to trade and investment, from cultural diplomacy to people contacts, can effectively support our overreaching goals. The common goal of reinforcing the connectivity is of particular relevance, and much effort will have to be dedicated to the implementation of the commitments set out at the summit. Energy, infrastructures, telecommunication, AI, space and transports are all areas of potential cooperation, which will require sustained political will and intensive exchange at institutional and technical level in order to be taken forward. It is also encouraging the common readiness to cooperate on innovative transport corridors, such as the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, which is an example of the complex relationship between security and prosperity. We need stable and secure environment to implement long-term infrastructure projects, but we also need good and sound transformative economic visions to provide the right incentives to solve conflicts and embrace peace. All above will not turn real if we will not to be able to fully mobilize the energies of our societies. That is why at the summit, but also in the 2022 new EU strategy for the Gulf, a substantial attention has been given to measures aimed to strengthen people-to-people contacts as a fundamental pillar of our long-term relationship. We have reaffirmed our commitment to continue to work on practical steps toward a mutually beneficial free travel arrangement between the GCC countries and the EU Schengen area, the famous liberalization of the visa. We have already a very rich program of academic and students exchanges, which we want to intensify further. There is nothing more productive for the establishment of solid relationship than having our youths getting more and more in touch and deepening their reciprocal knowledge. In my traveling to the Gulf region, I can clearly see how lively its civil society and how much of this vitality is due to the energy of its young population. It is in the European Union interest to be more and more in touch with the Gulf societies, and we are ready to multiply the opportunities for intercultural exchanges, including on interreligious dialogue. In conclusion, the summit was an important opportunity to highlight the commonalities that we already have, and to shape them where we do not see fully eye to eye, as well as to give a renewed impetus on practical cooperation. The next summit will take place in Saudi Arabia on 2026. About the current international dynamics, what unites the two regions, even more than a contingent convergence of interest, is the feeling of uncertainty in the face of the change in the international order. We both used to live in a comfortable status quo, and now need to adjust to a far less optimal situation. We both have to cope with the need for domestic transformation and with the deterioration of the security environment. Whether we are transitioning to a multipolar international system is a debated matter. There are reasons to think that while we are certainly not in a unipolar system anymore, we are rather going in the direction of a US-China bipolarism. However, it is evident that we live in a world in flux with no predetermined outcome. In this transition phase, international actors behave in accordance with their own perceptions of interest, their strengths, their weakness, as well as other actors' intention and capabilities. It is a world where uncertainty is the rule, and in which both the availability of military means and the willingness to use them are much higher than in the recent past. Those who have heavily relied on international cooperation, economic strength, and a stable environment are those who most need to adjust. It is clear that both European Union and Gulf countries fall in this latter category. It is possible to deploy various strategies in such a situation. The first might be increasing the deterrent by expanding its own power base, including by investing in defense, as well as in technologies such as artificial intelligence. Détente is a second option, aimed to reduce the threat posed by aggressive actors through dialogue and diplomacy and to get to a new balance of power. And third option might be to keep good relationship with everybody, including rivals and competitors. In various degrees, these are all options that Gulf countries are pursuing. They all seek a more prominent role in emerging technologies, for instance. The diplomatic re-engagement with Iran by Saudi Arabia is one example of détente, and as it is the choice of pursuing a political settlement under UN auspices of the Yemeni conflict. Even the decision to mend the family rift that has opposed Qatar to other GCC countries between 2017 and 2021 can be included in this category. Some GCC countries are also actively implementing a clear hedging strategy, as exemplified by the participation of UAE in the BRICS Plus exercise, or Oman and KSA participation in naval exercises with Iran. However, each of these strategies has its own limits. Increasing deterrence is costly, and it needs time to be effective. Détente can be less costly, but more effective in the short term, but it does not eliminate the possibility that the new balance will be upset again in the future. This brings me to the final point, which is about how this cooperation can be further taken forward and how it would be as asset for the global community. As I said, building a strategic partnership does not equal to say that we are in full agreement about everything. But it is impressive to see, when we go deep into current trends, how they affect at the same time both regions. Maybe not in the same way and with the same intensity, but still we can safely tell that if something is a problem for Europe, it's a problem for the Gulf as well, and vice versa. The war of aggression waged by Russia not only is a violation of the international law and UN Charter principles, it also constitutes a major security threat for Europe. At the same time, it deeply affects the Gulf countries in several different ways, from food security to the turbulences on oil and gas markets, for instance. We in Europe have reasons to be concerned by the defense cooperation between Iran and Russia. And similarly, Tehran, from the perspective of Gulf countries, remains a strategic puzzle they have to solve, and they have different options to do so. Most of the GCC countries are today trying to solve it through engagement and diplomacy, but this alone might not be enough. A larger international framework is needed, and this is where the EU has a role to play together with the allies as United States. Another clear example of how our respective security agendas are interlinked is, of course, the situation in Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon. This horrible humanitarian catastrophe that puts millions of lives at risk in the region is also a major cause of permanent instability, is affecting both the Gulf and Europe. That is why we have a strong interest in working together to find a definitive settlement of the Israel-Palestine question based on a two-state solution where both parts can coexist and feel secure. There are concrete but also very difficult diplomatic initiatives taking place as we speak. Last week in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia has organized the first meeting of the Global Alliance for the Two-State Solution, and the EU has already offered to convene a second follow-up meeting in November. While striving to address the immense humanitarian needs, we had to spare no efforts to set this issue. A third security problem that we have in common is the situation in the Red Sea. The attacks on international navigation and maritime security brought by Houthis not only cause significant damage to our economies, but even more worrying, they are further destabilizing countries and areas of strategic importance to both the EU and GCC, such as Egypt and the Horn of Africa. Finding a solid common ground between the European Union and the Gulf countries on those security and economic issues is key for both regions. But it is also an asset in the hands of those who would like to preserve a functioning multilateral system capable to promote international cooperation. The Brussels summit was the peak of a 2-year intense work in which all institutional levels have been mobilized. It also represents the beginning of a new cycle of a more structured and intensified relationship, which will culminate in the next summit in 2026 in Riyadh. The path ahead is clear. The GCC and the EU have a long to-do list, but in a world in disarray, they also possess the necessary determination and resources to be a powerful force for good. Together, I'm firmly convinced about that. Together, we can push back the zero-sum logic that seems now prevailing in global affairs. Thank you very much. I'm at your disposal for your questions.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed for this remarkable inventory of both the issues, the difficult issues that the EU and the Gulf countries had to cope with, and also of the important first steps that have already been made, despite the adverse winds that you were referring to. I think it's provides us with a number of issues to which we need to return. And I don't want to steal too much of the people's time, but in order to kick off the discussion, I would like to ask you perhaps to address the question from a slightly different angle, which is that of, dare I say, domestic European politics. The reason for my asking this is the following. I mean, I've always thought that the job of the EU High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy is the most difficult job in the EU, because not only must the person in charge deal with all the complex issues that Europe and Europeans are facing on the world scene, but also, of course, he has to find a common ground between the various member countries, and there's no shortage of examples to illustrate the difficulty of that task. So I'm tempted to ask you by analogy, what about the role of special envoys such as yourself? That is to say, you very much illustrated the EU's own ambitions, but we know how difficult it is for European countries to come to agree on a common agenda. So is it the case that, like the High Representative, you must spend 50% of your time talking to national capitals instead of devoting the bulk of it to your interlocutors in the Gulf countries? I mean, I'd be curious to hear more on that issue.
Yes, I'll try to answer, because it's a very complex question. But yes, of course, the main job of a special representative, we are almost 10 special representatives. for obviously different areas, is to implement a strategy on behalf of 27 member states. I have a strong advantage. As I said in my speech, we approved as member states, I was still Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, in May 2022, we approved the strategy. That is my menu of action. I have to follow this strategy of obviously updating, adapting the strategy and the contingencies according to the contingencies, but I don't see now a problem of divisions among the member states about the strategy. Of course, I'm not dealing, and it's not my business, about Middle East peace process, for instance, where, of course, since the beginning, since October 7, about the timing of the two-state solution, what we should do as member states about the situation in the Middle East, there were some nuances. And nuances is a diplomatic word, of course. But there is a point that is very important for the Gulf countries and even for us as member states, because it's clear that for the High Representative, so now is Josep Borrell, in 1 month should be, according to the hearings of the Parliament, Kaja Kallas, the former Prime Minister of Estonia. It's clear that when you try to organize a synthesis of 27 positions, it's very difficult. But for our partners and interlocutors, there is a bottleneck sometimes that it creates the condition that you cannot go bilaterally for having something that you need from the European side. For instance, you know better than me, but I would like to repeat it. For the member states, for me, I was Minister of Trade and Foreign Affairs, was forbidden to get a bilateral trade agreement with a counterpart because it's centralized at European level. And it's centralized in the hands of the Commission, the DG Trade, according to, obviously, following all the process of ratifications, the parliaments and so on, but the national parliaments and so on. But it's clear that for our interlocutors that want to deal for a free trade agreement with Europe, a huge market, they have to speak with Brussels. And this is the same, for instance, for the Schengen visa space. To apply for a visa, to have not a visa, it's a huge difference for many people in the world when you want to come to Europe. And doesn't matter if you want to come to Italy or I don't know, Germany and Spain and so on, or Czech Republic. You have to apply with the rules of the Schengen system. And of course, there are some countries of the European Union that are not in the Schengen system, as you know better than me, that we are improving that. But of course, about the Schengen space, that is even a huge touristic space, investment space, universities, so students, researchers, the liberalization of the visa, it's something huge in terms of connectivity between our people. And again, it's something in the hands of the European Commission. So what I'm saying is that, yes, sometimes it's very difficult to have a common position. And obviously the role of president of the council, president of the commission, and the high representative, the so-called top jobs, is not easy. But I have to say that around the world, for organizations that are less integrated than the European Union in terms of rules and powers and competences, in any case, even with less countries, they have the same problems. And as I said, sometimes it's a challenge even for our counterparts as blocks. But of course, it's not an easy job, and we are very happy that we had such skilled people like Josep Borrell before, that was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and now I don't want to be wrong, but should be the first ever Prime Minister that is going to be the High Representative of the European Union. And this is something important because, in particular, in the countries where I'm working, in the GCC, in the Gulf region, even the previous role is very important as level of engagement with your counterparts. And obviously, I was the first, I paid a visit to the Gulf in the United Arab Emirates. My first time, it was 2018. I was just appointed as Minister of Economic Development of Italy. And I remember very well that I met my counterparts, and I'm still working with that counterparts. And this is another value in order to have strong relations with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, as you please. The floor is open for questions and remarks. I will first see, yes, I see a student hand raised in the back, and with Vera's permission, I think it's only fair to start by giving the
Hi.
floor to our student.
Do you hear me correctly? Okay. I have first, thank you for your time. Thank you for your comprehensive speech, etc. And thank you also for your work in the Gulf. I mean, I study Middle East. It's complicated area at the moment, so thank you, etc. I have more of a personal question for you. Like I'm Italian. My name is Matteo. So I've known your political background for around 10 years, maybe even more. The question is, I want to understand what changed for you personally, as a person with political opinions, etc., when it comes to the European Union. Like I remember you as Deputy Prime Minister of what was considered by most political scientists as one of the most Eurosceptic governments in Europe, talking about experts as the cancer of democracy, this very populist agenda. And of course, now you occupy a much important position in the European Union. And I want to understand what personally changed for you when it comes to the political view you have as far as the European project is concerned, and yeah, the question that relates to national sovereignty and multilateralism. So I'm very interested in your personal, I wouldn't say growth, but change, political opinion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for this question, because this is the question, in my opinion, and it's very important to answer you before going to a group of questions and then I answer. First of all, this is the answer for this question is the storytelling of my life. I joined a populistic movement. The populist movement was called, and is still called with different support and votes, five-star movements. And I remember very well that when I became leader of the five-star movement, after I joined the movement in 2012 as activist on the territory in my region, in my city, and I became leader of the, and I was voted as leader of the five-star movement at the end of 2017. I already, at the time, clearly said that the idea to leave the Eurozone, it was unacceptable. And my line, if elected, was to change this line of the movement. And of course, on Europe, there were huge clashes between this movement and the European Union or the pro-European Union parties in Italy, because the debate, it was not between a party and the European Union. It was about the European Union between parties. About that, I have to say one thing, that according to all the changes of opinion from my side, it's clear that the European Union, which reacted after the COVID, it was not the same European Union that reacted after the financial crisis in 2008, 2007. Austerity versus another philosophy that it was this called the Recovery Fund and the Next Generation EU and so on. But it's not enough to answer you. The main game changer of my political experience, it was to go to the government. Because when you go to the government and you are a deputy prime minister, minister of labor, economic development, foreign minister, trade minister, and together in parallel leader of a party that is the main shareholder of the majority, it's clear that you have to implement what you said in the political program. And there you meet with the obstacles. I became member of the parliament and deputy speaker of the Italian chamber when I was 26. I went to the government 5 years afterwards, and I stayed for another 5 years, and then the Italian citizens sent me back at home. And it's clear that during these 10 years, the real game changer was in the middle, when we switched from the parliament, from the opposition to the government experience. But I have to say that in any case, it was not only an Italian I can say, movement of people. It was something that was emerging at the time in Europe because of the effects of the financial crisis. It was a sort of alarm, a sort of red light that was announced by the European citizens with the populism. And if I can say now, the sovereignism and obviously very right parties in some areas of Europe are the tool in the hands of many citizens that are flagging another problem, that are the effects of what happened after the Russian aggression against Ukraine. But even before the inflation started with after COVID era, we already were experiencing the higher price of energy, higher cost of the life. And of course, what is happening now in the Middle East is another point that is concerning people and is creating this unpredictable environment. I think that the real risk, and I said that at the Sunspo a few months ago before the European elections, where I was invited for in a meeting with students like that, the real risk is that in order to follow the populist party or right parties, sovereignist parties, the traditional parties are going to implement the program of those parties. The identity of the traditional families has not to be changed in a way or too much to follow the new parties or these movements, protest movements and so on, because it's precisely what happened with us at the time. I remember many cases where some parties in Italy tried to, traditional parties, traditional families tried to follow us in some kind of claims. And then we went to the government and they had the same difficulties that we had when we went to the government. Because it was a period where the prosperity, it was not the case. And now we are in a new period where obviously the relations between Europe and US are always the same, are always very strong. And I remember very well how much the result of the US elections, it affects as a political wave, even the political scenario in Europe. It's something that sometimes is not logic in terms of something happens there and there is a precise effect here. But it's clear that something happens between these two important societies. And this is why there is the tomorrow's result. It would be something that has to taken into account by the parties in Europe. And this is something that I experienced during my career as minister, both administrations. So I accompanied my prime minister and president of the republic several times to meet Trump and to meet Biden. I worked with Pompeo and with Blinken. And it's clear that the ties between Italy and US, I don't think that will change. The relations between European Union and US, it depends.
Thank you. Let's collect perhaps a series of questions so that you have, yes, you have the floor. Just a second, the mic is arriving, and then I'll give the floor to Vera.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. My question is specifically on the last point you mentioned. You mentioned it also briefly at the presentation, the introduction. Tomorrow's election in the US, how it will affect your job, how it will affect the current crisis in the Middle East, and do you think either there's a win from the Republican or Democrat is going to have a big impact on the war now between Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza?
Thank you. Can you pass the microphone just here? Yes, thank you.
Yes, I have a companion question, not to that of Reno. Namely, which is the degree of cohesion of JCC countries? Are there leaders inside? And which is the importance that they grant to these connections with the EU compared with other talks that they have, a dialogue with other areas of the world, United States and the BRICS and so on. Yeah. Thank you.
To that, I would add perhaps a footnote, which is, do we see the same unity on that side that we see on the European side, or or can you discern and share with us?
Unfortunately, we are not under Chatham House rules, so I cannot
I'm not,
say
not asking for
everything,
names.
but I'll try to answer.
More questions at this stage? Yes, I see a hand raised in the back.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Massimo. I wanted to ask you more of an Italian domestic politics question from your previous work. When the question is basically, how did you think that the universal basic income that you had proposed, the reddito di cittadinanza, would have changed Italy? Or what were your thoughts and thinking of that when you were creating that policy?
At the time.
Yeah, at the time. Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
If it is allowed, I answer.
It is allowed, of
Okay.
course. The right
Okay.
to free speech is something
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
regard as very important. But I can't guarantee Chatham House rules.
I know very well. Okay, so about the result of US elections on my job, of course, I am a mosquito compared to what is going to happen in US. And so it's not my job as special representative, but of course, it will affect the regional dynamics. And this is very important to understand in which fields Harris and Trump have the same line and in which fields they are not aligned. So if we look, first of all, my role is called Special Representative for the Gulf region and not for the GCC, because there is a reason. The reason is that originally, as member states, we were committed to elevate, as we are doing, the level of strategic, but the partnership at the strategic level with the GCC. But according to the strategy was called Gulf region because, of course, everything is happening there is linked to another important geopolitical actor of the region, that is Iran, and the so-called axis of resistance. That is, as I said, concerning both regions, Europe and Gulf, and is concerning even, as we can say, the international trade, looking at what is happening in the Red Sea. So what I can say is that we should do a sort of list of the main issues about the region and to try to understand where Trump and Harris are not aligned. The biggest question mark is about Iran, because we know that the Biden administration tried to revive the JCPOA with Iran. And in any case, during the Biden administration, despite the sanctions and despite I think that Iran, in a way, flagged all the wrong things to do in a to-do list, because military partnership with Russia, ballistic missiles to Russia against Ukraine, and drones against Ukraine that are landing sometimes accidentally even on the coasts of European countries like Romania, for instance, and so on. Are Iranian drones that are coming on the coast and at the borders with the European Union. Then repressions, executions, the point of the nuclear program, the direct attacks against Israel, and then defending this axis of, very proudly, this axis of resistance. So it's clear that every country in the EU has a bilateral issue with them, European citizens in the jail. It's clear that the relation, even US-Iran, during the Biden era was not the same of the Obama era. But we saw, for instance, the exchange of prisoners, not the exchange, the freeing of US prisoners in the jails, and so via the mediation of countries like Qatar and Oman. So there was an approach where they were not able to conclude the negotiation of the JCPOA. I was Minister of Foreign Affairs until summer 2022. I remember that even after February 22, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, European Union was the facilitator, was trying to facilitate and to conclude the revival of the JCPOA, but it was impossible because then the overlaps with the Russian aggression against Ukraine came, and so on. Rightly, many member states were very concerned about the supplies of weapons. But I have to say that on the other side, we know that this administration, in a way, will keep at least the Biden approach. We remember the approach of Trump at the time, maximum pressure. But we have to say that now the amount of sanctions against Iran and even of cautious approach from everyone, it's huge. So what will be the Trump's approach to Iran? Because this is the first question. I was in Washington many times, thanks to the academia, the think tankers. We have a lot of brainstorming under Chatham House rule, brainstormings and so on. But at the end of the day, it's in the mind of Trump, and we have to wait for the day when he will take the job, he will take the post. Second, about the Red Sea, for instance, I don't see differences because the Biden administration didn't approach the Red Sea crisis, freedom of navigation and so on, with an escalatory approach. Of course, they retaliated against targets on the ground of Houthis, against the Houthis on the ground in Yemen, but not with an escalatory approach in order to create frictions at the regional level for the spillover of the war. And of course, I don't think that Trump has the interest to focus too much the military efforts on Yemen. This is not my perception, for instance, but this is just an opinion. If we look at Israel, there are different ideas because, of course, the link between Netanyahu and Trump is huge. The meetings between Netanyahu and Trump, even the recent ones, were very clear. And we remember very well the Abraham Accords at the time that involved mainly the countries of the Gulf at the beginning, UAE and Bahrain. But we have even to say that the Biden administration supported Israel, defended Israel, and in a way it was very fair with Israel after October 7. What Harris and Trump will do with Netanyahu and about Israel after their elections, this is the question. Obviously, we can consider Trump closer to Netanyahu than Harris, but of course, we are seeing how much when it comes to defend Israel, the U.S. security system it intervenes and has a clear directive that is to defend Israel in any case. And now, after the latest that we are reading, it seems that Iran, we are reading the newspapers, but it seems that Iran is going again to attack Israel. And US was clear, we cannot contain Israel if you attack Israel, attack Israel again. So this is clear. On Lebanon, I think that the ceasefire is inauspicious of everyone. The point is how much Trump has the interest to keep wars around the world with obviously the involvement of US in order to defend the allies, or to try to close the files, as he says, about Ukraine and Russia, in order to focus his attention on the domestic issues, on US economy, and so on. This was something that we already experienced at the time, but we have to say that the dynamic to have less presence and military presence in the world, it was something that we experienced already with the Obama administration, not only with Trump administration. But it's clear that Trump is very vocal about this idea. So it will affect my job a lot. And what I think will not change is the relation between US and the Gulf countries, the GCC. On that, I don't think that something will change. Probably in some cases will improve in terms of visits, highest presence, and so on. And for the rest, we will see, because of course, the Israeli-Palestinian issue is affecting a lot the Gulf countries in terms of involvement of the public opinion. Obviously, we are speaking in a country where the average in terms of age, if I remember, and if I'm not wrong, should be 48. In those countries, the 75% of people are under 35. So it's almost the opposite of the continent, of this continent. So it's clear that if we look at the dynamics and how much are affecting the polarization of the civil society, the polarization of the public opinion in those countries in the Gulf, to solve the Palestinian issue is the gate then to have again, for instance, to revive the process of normalization Saudi-Israel that was happening before October 7, was going to happen before October 7. Let's see. About the cohesion, they are less, they have less mandatory processes than us. I don't want to say that they are less integrated because they are discussing about many projects, common currency, bank union. It reminds me something, no? What we did here. And there might be different opinions about this issue, these issues, but they are really involved in an effort of integration of the GCC as not only market, but even in terms of security policy. They just presented on February, I was there at the presentation in Riyadh at the GCC headquarters, they just presented the first ever security vision of the GCC. And it's something that is not for granted because looking at the geography of this Arabic Peninsula, it's clear that each country has different challenges. There are countries that are looking at the shore of Africa in the Red Sea, and on the other side they have as main neighbor Iran. So there are many challenges and different priorities in the foreign policy, but this effort to be integrated is something, to integrate their policies is very important and is noted. On our side, it's clear that as minister, I experienced the Russian aggression against Ukraine in the Foreign Affairs Council, and as special representative, the post-October 7. It's totally different, the cohesion, of course. Nothing new for you, but the cohesion is different. There are different approaches, but what we totally agreed at the summit, both blocs, is the two-state solution. That honestly, I know that now is on the paper. It's a solution on the paper. The conditions are several and are even different timings and sensitivities, but I can say that there was not for granted. As the chapter, the statement is public, but if you look at the final statement on Ukraine, defending together, EU and GCC, the sovereignty of Ukraine, it's a strong message. It's a strong then, of course, they have relations with Russia. They didn't put sanctions on the Russian trade, but it's clear that there are some starting points that are very exciting. And then about reddito di cittadinanza or basic income, whatever. We have to say that when I was Minister of Labor and Economic Development at the time, it was the main point of our political program. So all the citizens that voted the Five-Star Movement at the time, who voted the Five-Star Movement at the time, they knew clearly that on top of the program, at the first point, there was this basic income. And this is something not for granted, because then the day after, I remember that mainly among our voters, there were different opinions and even clashes about the basic income. I was appointed as minister and deputy prime minister for doing this job on June 2018. We approved the law, the decree for the reddito di cittadinanza in March 2019. After we allocated the money in the budget law at the end of 2018. And then obviously the implementation for the processes were in the reddito di cittadinanza law or something like that. And I remember very well that when we started this process, we said, okay, let's have 6 months of test. And then of course, we have to adjust the law. Because our idea, it was to create a flex security in the job system, in the work system, in order to create a system where the people that were losing the job, they had a safe situation, transitorial situation, transition situation, where they were able to go ahead and to look for a new job. 6 months afterwards, COVID came. And obviously, the reddito di cittadinanza became the support for many people that during the COVID lost their jobs. Or, we have to say, they were in a situation where they lost the informal job. not the formal job. And I remember at the time, no one during the COVID crisis, 2020 and 2021, said we have to cut this welfare tool, because it became something else, something different. It became a tool in order to face an extraordinary situation. When we came out of the COVID situation, it was clear that there were, for 2 years, some abuses, some situations where legally was not allowed to get the basic income. And it became the main claim of the opposition, that now is the government. And according to their program, they canceled the reddito di cittadinanza. What is now the level of the poverty, of the absolute poverty, and how much people are living in the absolute poverty in Italy, you can check directly. I don't think that the solution is only to subsidize people. This is a debate that is not only affecting Italy. If you go around Europe, there are many parties that are saying that they have the poorest people, the poor people, the richest poor people of Europe because of the subsidies. And this is affecting the human resources for the jobs, the human resources for the companies. It might be a part of the problem, but I'm not sure that is the only one problem why we have a shortage of workers. We have a shortage of workers even because we are getting older and older as continent. And the solutions now are on the ones that are politicians, are in the parliaments, are in the governments. But at the time, we wanted to implement an holistic approach where there was the basic income, the safe contracts for the workers, and many incentives for the innovations for the innovation and the innovative process to the companies. But the COVID changed everything. I approved the degree on March, 2 months for the final approval in the parliament for the conversion, as I can say. So it means that at the beginning of July, it was totally functional. And then at the end of, in 6 months arrived the COVID and everything changed. This is not an excuse, because it was a pity, because I was ready to change a lot of that law according to the tests on the ground. And when I met with several labor ministers around Europe that were managing the basic income change in order to adjust the tool against the people that illegally were getting it, they told me, you have to test and then you have to understand, because every society has dynamics, different dynamics. And this was right, because then it happened in Italy, but in a different way compared to Germany or France or other countries. Thank you very much. I hope that I answered you. Okay. It's the first time that I answer in English the reddito di cittadinanza question.
Well,
So it's the first ever for me.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, and thank you for addressing it in a very comprehensive fashion. I want to stress that it's, of course, not an exclusively Italian debate. I mean, the idea of a basic income is not even a new idea, by the way. It's been around for quite some time at the European level, and I remember reading old Federalist pamphlets dating from the, I think, 1960s, in which it was explained that it was the natural supplement to European integration, because it was important for citizens to have something in their pockets that would be linked to membership in the European Union. As we know, it still hasn't happened, but it means that there is room for some discussion. Yes, Jessica, you're here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jessica. I'm studying the European Public Policy degree, and we actually were talking today in our class with Dehus about the EU's green energy transition. And one of their proposed policies is the climate, the carbon tax, the carbon border.
Adjustment mechanism.
Yeah, adjustment mechanism.
Yeah.
How do you think that this, once it's implemented by 2026, will influence the trade that the EU shares with the GCC? And do you think it's a problem or can it be a problem?
Honestly, I don't, no, sorry, we can regroup even other questions if you wish. And okay, I can go ahead. Yes, I think that is not the case and is not an issue with the Gulf countries because they are attracting investments as well. And we were used to look at the GCC countries, in particular, Emirates with Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, Doha with Qatar, not Qatar with Doha, Kuwait, as investors abroad for many years. The foreign investment, the attraction of investment policy in Italy was a lot about those countries to come here to buy our hotels companies. They invested a lot in Italy, in Europe, in Paris, in France, even more in UK, not in the European Union, but in the European continent. But if we follow the example of Cristiano Ronaldo, we can see what is going to happen. Those countries invested in our football teams for many years, Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, and so on. I'm not a fan of the football, but I know that they bought a lot of important teams. And obviously, the main footballers at world level were under their sponsorships, Qatar Airways, Emirates. We read a lot about that. We saw these pictures. It was an important promoting system, promoting initiative. Now they switched. They said, okay, our domestic economies are ready for the switch to attract the investments from not only Europe, from all over the world. They bought Cristiano Ronaldo, and please help me, even others that are in Saudi Arabia, for instance, now. And they are developing their teams. Benzema, and Neymar, even Neymar. Mancini, is their ex-team coach. Yes, and now they are developing their football championship. And it seems that it's working because the people are going to the stadium or are buying the service to see on demand their championship because there are these main important footballers. Obviously, I'm using this as sample because it's happening everywhere in any kind of sector. Now they are attracting investments from everywhere. Our companies are going there. Our even plants sometimes are going there, not delocalizing, but opening new plants in those countries. And everything is about that. For instance, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia bought a part of the share of Technogym and or Uber, but everything is focused to develop plants, services there in Saudi Arabia. The same is with UAE, with this new Edge fund. Is a fund, a sovereign fund called Edge, to buy not only part of the share, but the majority of the companies. The Saudis, they entered in Telefonica. They joined Telefonica in Spain a few months ago. So what is happening is that they are now they have an awareness that they have an internal market, that is the GCC market, very young market, ready if they create new cities to attract even foreigners. Because the trend to Dubai that is happening now is that many Europeans are going to live with their families there to Dubai. And this is the ambition of everyone there. So about their competition is clear. It's a fair competition among them. But about the carbon adjustment mechanism and about the green transition policies, I see many overlaps now. It's not a risk for Europe, but is an opportunity, might be an opportunity if we are able to lead this process. In particular, when we look at hydrogen, they were reliable partners for the fossil fuels for many years. They did not weaponize the fuel during the last decades. Of course, if we go far in the history, it happened, but these leaderships were reliable partners for the fossil fuels. Now they want to become reliable partners for hydrogen. Saudi is going to be the first exporter, or the first supplier of hydrogen by 2030 at world level, the main. And UAE and Oman are already signing many contracts with our companies in Europe for producing hydrogen there, green hydrogen. And of course, European Union, for instance, is negotiating an MOU on energy cooperation with with the Saudi Arabia in order to establish even common regulatory frameworks about even hydrogen, not only hydrogen. So what I'm saying that they are working a lot on their perception, because I can totally tell you that every time I'm going to Riyadh, and I'm spending many weeks per month there, every time I'm visiting Riyadh, I'm visiting those cities of the region, it's clear that everything is different compared to the last time I was there. And I was there 2 weeks before. The dynamic of investments there in green energy, green transition, green credits, as are they called, is their main focus. And probably their awareness is not that the oil or the gas is going to finish, because they will have storages for a long time, and they are supplying mainly the Asia with China, with India and other countries. They are not the main supplier of Europe, for instance, even if there are supplies from those countries to Europe. Their awareness is that the oil will not finish, but the financial rules on the market around the world for the bankability of the infrastructures will change rapidly. And this is why some years ago, the new leaderships of the Gulf, this might be considered the third generation of rulers in the Gulf, decided to start this diversification process. And I cannot say on which sector, on which pillar they are investing, because they are investing everywhere. And honestly, are recruiting a lot of Europeans. Many managers are Italians there, of the main companies that are in the middle of the process of diversification. The company Aqua Power in Saudi Arabia that is working on the production of green hydrogen is led by a CEO that is Italian, Marco Arcelli. There are new museums that are going to build, and one of these museums will be led by an Italian as director. And this is per 27, because we have to consider this approach of our skills and know-how that they are taking from Europe in all the countries of the European Union. And then they are investing in the events, Dubai Expo 2020, the World Cup in Qatar, and then the COP29 in the Emirates. That is a case study, because everyone at the beginning was skeptical, because they said, come on, they are a country that is exporting fossil fuels, they are leading the COP28. And then it happened that the most historic result in a COP was achieved there with the consensus of all the countries around the world, US, Europe, and so on, about this sentence transitioning away from fossil fuels by 2050. And it's something that was negotiated many times in the COP before, in the COPs before, and was not achieved, and was achieved there. That it means that they are very influential on areas of the world where they trust them more than how much they trust us, like Africa, Latin America, Central Asia. And now Saudi, with this triplet, that is Expo 2030, we lost as Italy against them. And then the World Football Championship, again in Saudi Arabia, in the mid of the 30s. And then the Winter Games in Saudi Arabia during the 30s. The Winter Asian Games that are like the Winter Olympic Games in Saudi Arabia. The Italian company Salini we build is building this, the biggest dam at world level, the biggest ever dam, in order to create this village for the Olympics, for the people that have to look at the games and to participate in the games. And it's something unique, like the most important effort, like all the giga project that they are building. But the real point that we have to consider is that they are understanding that they can go ahead despite the historic partners. It's on us to try to fill the gap and to avoid to lose this train, because the activity of many other geopolitical actors in the region is relevant, is very relevant.
Thank you. I see that we have a online question here.
Observation in terms of supporting political reforms and promoting democracy, particularly in light of the recent Emir of the Southern Parliament and Qatar's constitutional amendments impact on political representation. Yeah. This is very important because I was waiting for this question, but was not coming. We can say we can put it more in the rule of law, human rights chapter. That is something very important. So I don't know how many people know here about that, but the European Union, with each one of the countries of the GCC, has this channel that is called project channel that is called Human Rights Dialogue. Every year there is a session at senior officials level, sometimes in closed door sessions, sometimes not. Sometimes with the members of civil society, NGO, with some other times not, where we discuss case by case what is happening there, what is concerning us in terms of human rights. This is very important because it's for us of utmost importance. One of the special representative is one among the special representatives is at large at world level for human rights, is leading these processes. And I have to say that every time we engage them, we see sometimes little steps ahead, sometimes better steps ahead, but the dialogue with countries that we consider partners, but we don't agree about everything with them, it's very important. We had the same with Iran in the past. Then we suspended because of many other reasons. And this is the difference. And I want to say that because there is a huge difference between the countries that we consider partners, and we don't agree, for instance, about some decisions on this chapter, but we continue to think that using the dialogue and the diplomatic channels, we are able to improve the situation. With other countries, when we didn't see improvements, but even the deterioration of the situation, like the repressions in Iran, we suspended these channels and we were more vocal, even using sanctions and so on. This is why I think that the European Union is doing, in a way, its best to try to implement processes to commit more and more our partners according to our concerns. But we have to say, and this is very important to say, that the more they are investing in these vision programs of diversification, the more they want to open the countries to attract foreigners and so on, the more the situation on the ground, I feel, is changing. If you look at countries like Saudi Arabia 6 years ago and today, if you speak with a person that was in Riyadh 6 years ago and today, the difference is huge. I don't want to mention why they are changing, because there are some things that sometimes can be criticized because you are saying, oh wow. But we know the political commitment of the rulers to try to attract investors, foreigners, and to open their society. We have even to consider that the most important part are not only youth, but they are trained abroad and they came back to their countries. This generation is creating a new dynamic in the society there, with obviously up and downs, with many even different opinions. Every time there were about this point problem issues, our statements from the European Union were clear and public and published. And so we are not hiding our positions. But what I can say is that compared to other cases where we didn't succeed, in this case, we feel that every time we engage with them, there is a step ahead, or in any case, not steps back behind.
Very good. Thank you for addressing this point. I know that there could be more questions and we could go on for some time, but you've already been very generous with your time. And I think it is my duty to bring this session to an end. I really want to thank all of you for taking part in it, but I want to ask you to join me in thanking our host tonight for one intense discussion, and express the hope that there will be opportunities in the future to carry on this conversation, because indeed we're talking of a moving target, or a series of moving targets. So thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much to all of you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.